Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel. It's Samantha. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for blessing me with your presence. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make a really powerful fenugreek and rosemary hair growth butter. So our first ingredient is going to fenugreek, which is one of my favorite ingredients, not only because it helps to stimulate growth, but can also help to thicken your hair. And it does so by increasing the number of hair follicles on your scalp and also increasing the diameter of the hair follicles so that the hair that's coming out of your scalp is actually going to be wider and therefore thicker. Fenugreek also has protein, so it can help to strengthen the hair and nourish the hair follicles and stimulate growth that way. Fenugreek also has iron, which can help to prevent hair loss in women, particularly of childbearing age, because they lose blood every month. And those women who experience heavy bleeding during their menstrual periods do suffer some degree of iron loss, and therefore using something like fenugreek can be really helpful. Of course, if you want to be sure, then you need to go see a doctor so that they can do a blood test to actually check your levels. Fenugreek also has DHT blocking properties, and DHT or dihydrotestosterone is the hormone that is responsible for hair loss, particularly in men, but it's also found in women, especially menopausal women, and this can therefore be really helpful in reducing the hair loss. The next ingredient is rosemary, which is one of my favorite ingredients as well because it helps to stimulate growth, and just like fenugreek, it can help hair to grow back in bald patches. So rosemary works very much like something called minoxidil. It's been shown through science to be just as effective as minoxidil. It helps to heal the nerve endings and reduce inflammation in the scalp, and therefore it's a really effective treatment for alopecia. So it is a really good healing herb. It also helps to stimulate scalp circulation, and therefore that's going to help to nourish the hair follicles by taking all the nutrients from the blood to the hair follicles. And then we have ginger is our next ingredient, and ginger, the reason I'm adding ginger here is because it really works to stimulate scalp circulation, and as we know, that is key to hair growth and regrowth, because that's going to help all the nutrients from the foods that we eat and also in the products that we use to facilitate them being delivered to the hair follicles so that they can nourish the hair follicles and our hair will grow. Our next ingredient is shea butter. I'm using this one. You can use any brand. I prefer the unrefined shea butter because it has more nutrients, but you can use the refined one if that's your preference. Shea butter is a really good skin emollient, so it'll keep the scalp nice and healthy, but it also has nutrients and therefore it can help to nourish the hair follicles. It's a good lubricant, so it'll help to prevent knots and tangles in the hair. Our next ingredient is olive oil, which is really good at softening and conditioning the hair, and it also helps to keep the scalp supple and healthy. And as we know, healthy hair grows out of a healthy scalp. Olive oil is also good at lubricating the hair strands, and therefore it can help to prevent knots and tangles. And olive oil also has nutrients in it, so it can help to penetrate the hair follicles and nourish the hair follicles. You can use alternatives if you don't like olive oil. Things like sunflower oil, jojoba oil, almond oil are really good. You can also use coconut oil if that is what your favorite oil. We need a heat-resistant jar, and we'll also need a blender. So the first step is to grind our herbs and spices into a powder, and I'm going to add 1 tablespoon of the fenugreek seeds, and then I'll add 1 tablespoon of the rosemary into the blending jug, and then I'm going to add 1 tablespoon of the ginger, and then we're going to blend them together and create a powder. So you don't actually have to blend them into a powder, but the advantages are that if you blend them into a powder, the infusion is going to be much more effective, and it'll also help to quicken up the process. So the infusion is going to ultimately take about a week, but if you were to use the seeds as they are, then to create a really potent butter, you would have to infuse them over a period of 2 to 3 weeks. So that's why I like to blend mine. So you don't have to blend this into a really fine powder. As long as you've broken it down somewhat, it's going to be effective. As you can see, that's what my powder looks like, and it's not very fine, but this is going to work perfectly. So I'm going to pour all of that powder into the heat-resistant jar, and I'm going to follow that up by adding the other ingredients so that they are going to mix and infuse. So I'm going to add half a cup of the shea butter into the glass jar. So the reason I want to do this is so that the herbs and spices not only infuse the oil, but they're going to infuse the shea butter as well, and therefore make it really, really potent. So as you can see, it was a bit of a task getting the shea butter out of that measuring cup into the jar. So an easier way to do it would have been to melt the shea butter beforehand, but I just didn't want to use too many utensils, to be honest. And then I added a quarter cup of the oil straight into the jar. And now we're going to warm everything up, and this will not only help to start the infusion process, but it will also help to melt the shea butter. So it's like a 2-in-1 process. So I just put some freshly boiled water into a Pyrex casserole dish, and then made sure that the jar was tightly closed, and then just immersed that in that freshly boiled water. So that heat from the water is going to melt the shea butter, and it will also help to activate the spices and the herbs so that they start to infuse the oils. So I'm using this easy melt shea butter, so it didn't take long for it to melt, and the shea butter and the olive oil, then started to mix with the herbs and the spices. So if you have a more solid shea butter, or if you just prefer it, instead of using this method I'm using to melt the shea butter, you can actually just use the double boiler method and then transfer the mixture to your glass jar afterwards. So once the shea butter is melted, we basically have a combination of oils and the herbs and spices. So I'm just going to stir everything so that the oils mix with the herbs and spices. And that's because the spices, which are now in a powder form, tend to settle at the bottom. And then I'm just going to allow this to cool down in a dark cupboard. And you'll see further down that as it's cooling down, the shea butter will start to solidify again. And this is exactly what we're looking for. So after a while, you notice that the shea butter is almost completely solidified again, and then the olive oil will be at the top. But before the shea butter completely turns into a solid, then we're just going to mix everything again so that the oils will mix with the herbs and spices thoroughly. We're going to put this away in a dark cupboard for a week so that they can infuse thoroughly. And from time to time, just check on it, because if the powders have settled at the bottom, then you need to stir them up again. Otherwise, they won't infuse properly. And this is what it looks like after a week. As you can see, the spices, the herbs, they are suspended in that solid shea butter and olive oil mixture. So now that the herbs and spices have done their job and infused our oils, we are now going to separate them. And because it's a solid mass, as you saw, we need to melt it down. And it doesn't take long. Just put the glass jar into a pot of water, simmer it down for a few minutes, close the lid so that, the heat is retained. And within minutes, honestly, it will have melted. And we are going to leave this for a little bit until it is safe enough to open that jar. So we're not going to be handling anything hot, otherwise we're going to burn our hands. So I'm just going to use a little bag there, cloth bag, that will help to separate the oils from the powders and make sure that there aren't any particles left in the butter. So you can use a cheesecloth or something really, really fine that will work as well. And then I'm just going to strain that as I'm demonstrating. So this is what we're left with. It is essentially the liquid form of our hair growth butter. So personally, I like to add glycerin because it just gives a silkier texture, but this is entirely optional. You don't have to add it because I know some people don't like glycerin, but if you're going to add it, then just add 1 tablespoon of glycerin and then mix it really well. And then we are going to cover this with cling film, or you can use aluminium foil, and then we're going to put it in the fridge for about 30 minutes so that it starts to solidify before we can whip it. So don't put this in the freezer because it becomes highly unstable if you do that, because we've melted it, allowed it to solidify and then remelted it. So just put it in the fridge and that'll be absolutely fine. And it takes about 30 minutes for it to get to the texture that we're looking for. So it doesn't have to be completely solid. As you can see, mine is not solid, and now it's time to whisk it. And yes, this happens to be my favorite part of making the hair butters. So I'm going to show you a way to make sure that your hair butter stays really soft and fluffy, because sometimes when you whip your butters, they can harden or solidify, and they're not as fluffy as you'd like them to be, and that can depend on your ambient temperature or the season that you're in. So the way to get around that is to actually whip it 3 times. So we just call it triple whipped for that reason. So you first whip it for about 5 minutes, and as you can see, the color of the butter starts to change. It lightens up from that gorgeous, dark golden color. Is now lightening up, and that's exactly what we expect. So whip it for about 5 minutes, and then you'll then leave it to harden again, and then you whip it for the second time, and then allow it to harden again, and then whip it for the 3rd time. So keep watching the video, because then it'll all make sense what I'm explaining just now. So I hope you enjoyed watching that. I love watching butters being whipped. So this is what the final consistency will be like. And this is fine for me. I actually like this consistency. But if you want it to be a little bit looser, all you do is just add 1 or 2 tablespoons more of oil, and then that'll be it. Again, you can personalize this. If you want to add essential oils, you can do that. And I have a video explaining the essential oils that can stimulate growth so that you have a choice. So I'll put the link to that video in the description box below. So in terms of storage, this is very easy. You just put it in a clean container, sterilize it just to make sure there are no germs, etc. And you keep it at room temperature. You don't need to put it in the fridge because there's no moisture in there. And you just use it like you would any other hair butter. But you can also add a little bit to deep conditioners to enrich in them. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoy that. And before I go, I'd like to give my subscribers and everybody who comes and engages with the content a massive thank you. If you've not yet subscribed to the channel, then please do subscribe. And I'd also really appreciate it if you give the video a thumbs up, because that helps me to know I'm making content you're enjoying, and also it helps to promote my channel on YouTube. And if you want to be one of the first to know when I have a new video on the channel, just sign up for notifications. So until next time, my lovelies, you take care of yourselves and take care of your loved ones. Bye for now, and God bless.